A diamond does not lie. That is the first thing they teach you about stones worth more than a man's life, and it is the last thing I would ever have thought to doubt. A ruby can be cooked in a furnace until it forgets it was ever glass. An emerald can hide a fracture behind oil and a clever setting. But a true diamond throws its light back at you the way a clear conscience meets a hard question, straight, cold, unafraid. So when I stood my post below the dais on the morning of the Jubilee, and watched the great stone at the heart of the State Crown of Eldermoor look back at me like a dead eye, I knew, before I could have told you how I knew, that I was looking at a lie. My name is Kestrel Dunmore, and for 11 years I have stood in the royal House of Harrowgate as a guardsman of the inner watch. I say stood because that is the whole of the craft as the world sees it. A man in a red wool tunic with brass buttons the size of a child's fist, a tall black bearskin that turns a July morning into an oven, white gloves, a rifle he has not fired in anger since the day he swore his oath. The world walks past that man in the tens of thousands and sees furniture. Handsome furniture, polished furniture, but furniture. They do not know that stillness is not emptiness. A man who is forbidden to move learns to do all his living with his eyes. In 11 years mine had grown very good indeed. The Heartstone of Eldermoor sat where it had sat for 200 years, at the crossing of the crown's 4 arches, above the ermine and the purple velvet, under a dome of glass and gold on the high table of the Jubilee Hall. It was the size of a pigeon's egg, and it had a name older than the dynasty. When Queen Mother Rosalind wore the crown at her own accession, I have seen the paintings. The Heartstone was said to have thrown a pane of colored light across the whole nave of the cathedral, so that the bishop stood in a rain of little rainbows and wept. That was the Heartstone. That was what a great diamond did. It took the plain white light of the world and broke it open and gave it back to you in pieces of fire. The thing under the glass that morning did none of that. I want to be precise because everything that followed turned on precision. The hall was bright, the tall east windows open to a hard, clean sun, the kind of light that shows every flaw. Down the table the lesser jewels lay out for the household to view, the collars of the old orders, the scepter with its river of small brilliants, a brooch of the late Queen Isolde's, 3 tiaras on black velvet. Every one of them was alive. Light crawled and leapt across them. The little stones on the scepter were a nest of white sparks that never held still. That was the room's honest weather, and against it the Heartstone hung like a hole cut in the day. It glittered, I will grant it that, but it glittered the way a wet stone in a river glitters, all surface and no depth. A true diamond gathers the light and hoards it and pays it back with interest in every color there is. What sat in the state crown gave the light back gray and cold, and even the same tired gray no matter how the sun moved. It had no fire. It had a dutiful sparkle, the sparkle of good glass or one of the new-made stones the jewelers had begun to grow in their furnaces, and exactly nothing of the living thing whose portrait hung in the gallery over my head. I did not move. Of course I did not move. That is the whole discipline. A guardsman who lets his face report what his eyes have found is worse than useless. He is a leak. But inside the still shell of me, a cold current started to run, and it did not stop running for 11 days. You will ask how a man in a bearskin comes to know one stone from another. Before the guard, I was 3 years apprentice to my uncle, who cut and set stones in a shop with a north window, and a bench worn to a hollow by 200 years of elbows. I was not good enough to make a jeweler. My hands were too big and too slow. But a boy learns with his eyes long before his hands fail him, and my uncle taught me to look. He would put 2 stones on a white card and make me name the true one and the false, over and over, in every light there was, until I could do it in the gray of a rainy afternoon with my heart in my throat. Fire, he said. You cannot fake fire, boy. A liar can copy the shine. Only the truth burns. So I stood there in the bright hall on the morning of the Jubilee, and I looked at the Heartstone of Eldermoor and I thought, in my uncle's flat north country voice, that stone does not burn. Someone has taken the truth out of the crown and put a lie in its place, and I am the only man in this kingdom who is standing close enough and looking hard enough to see it. That is not a comfortable thought to have inside a bearskin, with the whole household drifting past your post in silk and metals, laughing at things you cannot hear. The first face I put to the fear was the wrong one, and I record it so you will not think me a cleverer man than I am. The first face was Lord Cassius. He came into the hall not long after I had made my terrible little discovery, and he came the way he always came, as though the room had been kept waiting for him. He was the queen consort's son by her first marriage, a tall, smooth man of 40 with a tailor's eye and a gambler's smile, and the household had learned to be careful of him, the way you are careful of a step in a stair that gives a little under your foot. He drifted down the table with 2 of his set, and he stopped at the crown, and he looked at the Heartstone for a long moment with his hands clasped behind his back, and then he smiled to himself and moved on. I read too much into it standing there. I thought, he knows. But a guardsman learns, if he is any good, to tell the difference between what he has seen and what he has decided, and I made myself set Lord Cassius aside. A man may smile at a diamond for 100 reasons, and 40 of them are vanity. I had no evidence but a smile and a bad feeling, and a bad feeling has hanged more innocent men than any liar ever did. What I had that was worth anything was the stone, and a guardsman, whatever the paintings suggest, is not permitted to lift the glass off the State Crown and put a loop to the Heartstone because the fire looks wrong to him. I could not act on what I had seen. I could only carry it, still and silent, off the end of my watch, and decide who in all the House of Harrowgate I could trust to hear it. That decision took me the length of a sleepless night, and in the morning I asked, through the proper channel and in the proper words, for a private audience with the keeper of the regalia. The keeper was an old man named Ansel Thorne, who had kept the jewels of Eldermoor for 30 years, and loved them the way other men love their children. He was thin and dry and precise, with ink on his fingers and a jeweler's glass on a black ribbon around his neck, and when I came into his narrow office off the strongroom stair, he looked at me over his spectacles with the mild irritation of a scholar interrupted. Guardsmen did not request audiences with the keeper. Guardsmen stood where they were put. "Sergeant Dunmore," he said, reading it off the slip his clerk had brought him. "You have 2 minutes. My morning is not my own this week, as I am sure you can imagine." "Sir," I said, "the Heartstone in the State Crown is not the Heartstone." I had rehearsed a dozen gentler ways to say it and thrown them all away in the night. There is a time for a soft approach, and there is a time to put the hard fact on the table and let it lie there, and with a man like Ansel Thorne, I judged the second was the only one that would not waste his 2 minutes. He went very still. The irritation drained out of his face, and something older and more careful came into it. "Explain that," he said. "It has no fire, sir. I stood below the dais all yesterday morning in full east light, and it never once broke the light into color. A stone of that water and that size should have thrown fire across the table with every shift of the sun. It threw nothing. It shines like paste or like a grown stone. I was 3 years at a jeweler's bench before I came to the guard, and I would stake my post on it. The stone in the crown is a counterfeit." For a moment I thought he would have me removed. His hand had gone to the little bell on his desk. Then it stopped, and he sat back, and he took the glass from around his neck and turned it over in his fingers as though it had asked him a question. "You understand what you are saying," he said quietly. "You are saying that the Heartstone of Eldermoor, which I inspected with my own eyes and my own instruments not 3 weeks ago, and certified for the Jubilee, has been stolen and replaced, under my keeping, without my knowledge. You are saying I am either a fool or a thief." "I am saying what I saw, sir. I have no opinion of you at all. I know your name and nothing else. If I am wrong, I would rather be wrong to your face this morning than let the wrong stand until it cannot be mended. And if I am right," I stopped. "If I am right, sir, then the longer we wait, the further the truth travels from us." Ansel Thorne looked at me for a long time. I have stood under the eyes of angry princes and drunk lords and men who wanted to see me flinch, and I did not flinch under any of them. But I will tell you that the old keeper's steady gray stare cost me more than all of them together, because there was no cruelty in it, only a terrible weighing. "Come," he said at last, and rose and took a ring of keys from his desk that must have weighed 2 pounds. "The Crown is back in the strong room until this evening. We will look. And Sergeant, if you have wasted my morning, I will have you scrubbing the mews until you are gray. But if you have not," he did not finish. He led me down the winding stair to the iron door of the strong room, and I followed him into the cold. And I did not know yet that I had just set my hand to a thread that ran through the whole House of Harrowgate, and that when I pulled it, a great deal more than a diamond was going to come loose. The strong room was a stone chamber the size of a chapel, cold as a cellar even in July, lit by hard electric lamps Ansel Thorne switched on one by one. The great cases stood along the walls behind glass and steel. In the center, on a stand, sat the State Crown under its traveling dome. Thorne set the dome aside with the care of a man handling a sleeping thing, lifted the crown in both hands, carried it to a bench under the brightest lamp, and screwed his glass into his eye and bent over the Heartstone. I watched his back. I could not see his face, but I could see his shoulders, and I saw the exact moment they changed, the small collapse, the breath let out, the way a man's whole body admits a thing his mouth has not yet said. He stayed bent over the stone for a long time. When he straightened at last and took the glass from his eye, he had aged 5 years. "It is a synthetic," he said. His voice had gone flat and strange. "A grown stone, very good, extraordinary in fact, cut to the exact proportions of the original, set with the original claws. Whoever did this did not simply drop a piece of glass into the mount. They matched the cut. They matched the weight near enough I would have to put it on the balance. Anyone who lifted the dome and glanced would see the Heartstone. Anyone who did what I did 3 weeks ago and looked with a glass would have seen." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Would have seen what I saw, and I did not see it, Sergeant, because 3 weeks ago it was not there. The stone I certified was the true stone. This was put in after." "Then it was done in the last 3 weeks," I said. "It was done in the last 3 weeks," he agreed, "under my keeping behind that door which does not open without one of 4 keys, and I hold one of the 4. He looked up at me, and there was no self-pity in it, only a dreadful clarity. "You have not accused me, Sergeant, so I will accuse myself, since I am the obvious man. I had the access, I had the knowledge, and I had the certifying pen. If I meant to steal the Heartstone of Eldermoor, this is precisely how a clever man in my chair would do it, and then he would stand where I am standing and say what I am saying, to be believed. Remember that. Trust me no more than you trust anyone. That is the only honest thing I can offer you. I have met few men I respected on sight." I respected Ansel Thorne from that sentence forward, and it turned out to be the most important judgment I made in the whole affair. But I did not know that yet either. I only knew that the thing I had feared was true, that the Heartstone was gone, and that the two of us were now standing over the empty place where the truth had been, with a false light shining up at us, and a whole palace above our heads that did not know it had been robbed. "Sir," I said, "what do we do?" "We do not raise the alarm," said Ansel Thorne, and though his voice shook I heard the mind behind it click into gear like the works of a good clock. "Not yet. Hear me. If we cry theft this morning, the Jubilee collapses in scandal, the thief goes to ground, and the Heartstone is out of the kingdom on the evening tide. We have one advantage in the whole world, and it is this: the thief does not know he has been seen. He believes his counterfeit is perfect, and by any reasonable measure it is. It took a guardsman who was raised at a bench and who stared at it for 4 hours to catch it. If we keep our faces still, he will keep his, and while he is comfortable he will make the mistakes that comfortable men make. The moment we shout, we lose that, so we do not shout, we hunt, quietly, you and I and no one else, until we know who holds the true stone. Can you do that, Sergeant? Can you carry this behind that stone face of yours and give nothing away? to anyone of any rank, for as long as it takes. I thought of 11 years of standing still, while the world did its worst an arm's length from my face, and never getting so much as a twitch out of me. "Sir," I said, "carrying things behind a still face is the only trade I have." The old man almost smiled. Then he set the crown back on its stand and drew the dome down over the lie, and we began. The strong room, Ansel Thorne explained as he moved down the wall of cases checking each seal, was not the fortress the household imagined. The great pieces could not be worked on in the room itself. No bench fit for fine setting, no gas for the little torch a jeweler needs to open and close a claw. When a stone had to be reset or a mount repaired, the piece went up 2 floors to the regalia workshop, a bright room with a north window where the household jeweler kept his tools, under guard, in a locked case, in the keeper's own hands or the assistant keeper's. And in the last 3 weeks, Thorne said, exactly 1 great piece had gone up to the workshop and come back down again. The State Crown. "It went up 11 days ago," he said, and his voice had the careful evenness of a man walking on ice. "One of the small brilliants on the lower band had worked loose in its collet. I found it myself at the last inspection, the one where I certified the Heartstone true. A loose stone in the State Crown 11 days before a Jubilee is not a thing you leave. So the crown went up to the workshop to have the collet tightened, and it came back the same afternoon, and I logged it in and out with my own hand, and I did not think to re-inspect the Heartstone, because why in God's name would I? The work was on the lower band. The Heartstone was never touched." He closed his eyes. "The Heartstone was never touched. That is what the thief wanted me to think, and I thought it, and I signed my name under it." "Who was in the workshop that afternoon?" "That," said Ansel Thorne, "is the question that will not let me sleep tonight, and I have not yet asked it, because the moment I ask it aloud, the man I ask will know that I know." He turned from the cases and faced me. "There were 3 men who could have been in that room with the crown, Sergeant, and I will name them to you, and then you will understand why I said trust no one. The first is the household jeweler himself, Master Orland Vane, who has the tools and the skill and the temperament, and who has certified more of these stones than I have. The second is my own assistant keeper, a young man named Bram Halloran, whom I trained from a clerk and would have sworn on my life was honest as daylight, though a man who says that of another man is usually about to be made a fool. And the third," he stopped, and I watched him weigh whether to say it. "The third is not a craftsman at all, and could not have cut or set the counterfeit himself, but he was in the workshop that afternoon, and he had no earthly business being there. And when I asked him why, he told me he was admiring the collection, and I let it pass because of who his mother is." "Lord Cassius," I said. The keeper's eyebrows rose a fraction. "You know something." "I know he stood over the crown yesterday and smiled at the Heartstone, and I told myself it meant nothing, because a smile is not evidence." I paused. "It is still not evidence, sir, but I confess I did not like the smile." "No," said Ansel Thorne softly, "neither did I like the visit. Well, there are our 3, a master jeweler who could do the work, an assistant keeper who had the access, and a lord who had neither the skill nor the right to be there. But who was there, and who is his mother's son? The mother, of course, we do not name aloud in this palace unless we wish to find ourselves posted to the marshes. But you are not a stupid man, Sergeant, and I will not insult you by pretending the Queen Consort's shadow does not fall across this room the moment her son walks into it." I said nothing. It is one of the first things a guardsman learns, that there are names you do not speak inside the walls, and Morwenna, Queen Consort of Eldermoor, was the chief of them. She had come into the House of Harrowgate as the king's second wife, after the death of the good Queen Isolde, and she had come with a following, her son Cassius, her daughter Lady Verena, a train of cousins and creditors and hangers-on. And in the years since, the household had quietly divided itself, as households do, into those who served the crown and those who served the consort, and had learned to tell the two apart by 100 small signs. I served the crown. I had never had cause to think about which side Ansel Thorne stood on, but I marked, in that cold room, that he had named the consort's shadow without flinching, and I marked that he had named his own guilt first of all, and I decided that whatever else was true, the old keeper was on the king's side of the line. "We start with the workshop," I said. "The 3 men who could have been in it. If we can learn which of them was alone with the crown that afternoon, and for how long, we narrow 3 to 1. "We cannot ask them," Thorne reminded me, "not without giving ourselves away. We do not ask them, we ask the door." He looked at me. "Every room in this wing that holds anything of value has a watchbook at the door," I said, "and the workshop more than most. Every man who goes in signs his name and the hour. Every man who comes out signs again. I have signed 100 of them myself. The books do not lie, and they do not know they are being read. If the crown went up 11 days ago, then the workshop book for that day holds the name of every man who was in that room and the exact minutes he was in it. It will tell us who was alone with the crown. And no one need know we looked, because the man who keeps that particular book is a guardsman, and the guard talks to the guard." For the first time since he had bent over the false stone, something like hope crossed Ansel Thorne's dry old face. "You begin to earn your 2 minutes, Sergeant," he said. "Get me that book." Getting the book was the easy part, and I will not dwell on it, except to say that the man on the workshop door 11 days running was a steady old soldier named Pike whom I had known since I was a recruit, and that when I told him, carefully, giving nothing away, that the keeper needed to check a date against the workshop log for the Jubilee accounts, he handed me the current book without a second thought, and told me the older ones were in the guardroom press. Guardsmen are trusted by guardsmen. It is the quiet machinery that holds a palace together, and it is also, I would learn before this was over, the very machinery a clever thief had counted on. That evening, in the keeper's narrow office with the door locked and the lamp turned low, Ansel Thorne and I bent over the workshop watchbook for the day the crown went up, and we read it line by line, and what we found there turned the whole affair over on its face. The entries were plain and clerkly and damning. At 2 hours past noon the crown had come up under guard, signed in by Ansel Thorne himself and witnessed by the guard on the door, Pike's own hand, neat as print. At 2:15, Master Orland Vane, household jeweler, had signed in to do the work, so far exactly as the keeper had said. But then the book grew crowded. At 2:30, Bram Halloran, assistant keeper, had signed in to observe the work, the note said, which was ordinary enough. A keeper's assistant is meant to know the collection to his fingertips. And at 3 o'clock, in a hand I did not recognize, loose and careless and pressed too hard, was a 4th name. Lord Cassius Harrow. "He signed in," Thorne breathed. "The fool signed the book. I did not think a lord does not sign a guard's book. No lord ever has, but he signed it, because Pike made him, because Pike does not know the difference between a lord and a lamplighter when there is a book to be signed." A grim satisfaction moved under the old man's exhaustion. Pike. God bless the man's wooden head. "Read the Times," I said. "It is the times that matter, not the names. Read who was in the room, and who was out, minute by minute." We read the Times, and here is what the book that could not lie told us. Master Vane the jeweler had worked on the crown from 2:15 until 10 minutes to 4, signed in at 2:15, signed out at 3:50, an hour and 35 minutes, the whole of the work, and he had never once left the room. The assistant keeper, Bram Halloran, had come in at 2:30 and gone out again at 3:10, 40 minutes, and come back at 20 to 4 and stayed until the crown went down. Lord Cassius had come in at 3 and gone out at 30 minutes, and not returned. I sat back, the lamp hissed. Somewhere far off in the palace, a clock was striking the hour, and under my ribs the cold current I had first felt below the dais was running fast now, because the book had just taken my chief suspect and set him aside. "He is out," I said. "Lord Cassius. Look at it, sir. He was in the room half an hour from 3 to half past, and for the whole of that half hour the jeweler Vane was at the bench and the crown was under Vane's hands and Vane's eyes and never left them. Cassius could not have touched the Heartstone. Vane was watching the crown the entire time Cassius was in the room. Whatever Cassius came for, and I do not believe for a moment he came to admire the collection, he did not come to swap the stone, because he could not have done it with Vane's glass 6 inches from the mount. The book clears him." "Does it?" said Ansel Thorne, and something in his voice made me look up. "Sorry." The old keeper laid one ink-stained finger on the page, on the line that read Orland Vane, signed out 350, and then he moved it down to the next line, the last line of the afternoon, where his own clerk had noted the crown going back down to the strong room. "The crown was signed out of the workshop at 10 minutes past 4, he said, "by Bram Halloran, my assistant keeper, in his own hand, to carry down to me." But the jeweler Vane finished his work and left the room at 10 minutes to 4. And between those 2 times, Sergeant, between the jeweler laying down his tools and leaving, and the crown going back into the strong room, there are 20 minutes. 20 minutes in which the State Crown of Eldermoor sat on a bench in an open workshop with a north window and a full set of a jeweler's tools laid out beside it. And in those 20 minutes, according to this book that cannot lie, exactly one man was alone in that room with the crown. I looked where his finger pointed, and the cold current went still and cold as the strong room floor. "Bram Halloran," I said. "My assistant keeper," said Ansel Thorne, and closed the book. "The young man I trained from a clerk." The one I would have sworn was honest as daylight. He put his hand over his eyes for a moment, and when he took it away he was the keeper again, dry and precise and terrible. 20 minutes alone with the crown, the tools at his hand, the door not opening, the guard outside asking no questions because it is only young Halloran, whom everyone knows and no one watches. It is enough. For a man with his skill it is more than enough. I have been a fool, Sergeant. I looked at the great and the powerful, at Vane's mastery and Cassius's malice, and a shadow I dare not name, and all the while the answer was the boy who carried my keys and fetched my tea. He rose. "Come, now we know where to look. Now the true hunt begins." But even then, and I set it down because it is the truth, and because a man who tells this kind of story owes you the truth about his own blindness, even then I did not have it right. The book had shown me a locked door and a man alone in a room, and I had done what every honest mind does with a locked door. I had assumed the man inside it was the guilty one. It would be days yet, and a great deal of quiet and patient walking of corridors, before I understood that the book that cannot lie had told me the exact truth, and I had read it exactly wrong, that Bram Halloran had indeed been alone with the crown for 20 minutes, and had indeed done a thing in that room that he would go to his grave ashamed of, and was nonetheless not the man who stole the Heartstone of Eldermoor. The truth, when I finally cornered it, was crueler and cleverer than a boy alone with a bench of tools, but that is running ahead. On the night we closed the workshop book, I believed we had our thief, and I slept for the first time in 2 nights, and I was wrong. We could not simply seize Bram Halloran and put the question to him. Ansel Thorne was firm on that, and he was right. We had a book that placed the young man alone with the crown. We had nothing that placed the true Heartstone in his hand or the false one in his pocket. If we accused him and searched him and found nothing, we would have shown our whole hand to the whole palace. The thief, whoever he truly was, would go to ground, and the boy, if he were innocent, would be broken for life on our suspicion. So we watched. For 2 days I found reasons to be where the assistant keeper was, and I learned him the way you learn a man you mean to catch. Not his words, which any man can guard, but his hands and his eyes and the small tells of a body under strain. And Bram Halloran was under strain. That much was plain within an hour. He was a slight, quick, dark-haired young man of perhaps 25, with clever, restless fingers and a way of ducking his head when a senior passed, and he was frightened half out of his wits. He startled at footsteps. He had stopped eating. The kitchen maid said his trays came back untouched. Twice I saw him standing at a window with his hands pressed flat on the sill and his shoulders up around his ears like a man expecting a blow. Here is your guilt, I thought, watching him. Here is a young thief eaten alive by the size of what he has done, waiting for the hand to fall. It was Ansel Thorne, who knew the boy far better than I, who was not satisfied. He is frightened, the old keeper agreed on the second evening. But I have watched frightened men my whole life, Sergeant, and there are two kinds. There is the man who is frightened of being caught, and he watches the doors and counts the exits and his fear points outward at you, at me, at the guard. And there is the man who is frightened of something he cannot escape by running, and his fear points inward, and he cannot meet your eye, not because he fears you but because he cannot bear himself. Halloran will not meet my eye, and a thief who had gotten clean away with the Heartstone of Eldermoor and passed his counterfeit under my own nose would have no reason on earth to be ashamed before me. He would have every reason to be pleased. That boy is not pleased. That boy is drowning in shame. I want to know what he is ashamed of before I decide it is theft. So we changed our plan, and instead of watching Bram Halloran, we let him find us. Or rather, Ansel Thorne, on the third morning, did a thing that took a kind of courage I have rarely seen. He called the boy into his narrow office, and he sat him down, and he sent for me to stand at the door, and then instead of accusing him, he simply said, in a voice with all the dryness gone out of it, "Bram, something is wrong with you, and it has been wrong for 11 days, and I have known you too long to watch you sicken and say nothing. I am not your master this morning. I am the man who taught you your letters in this collection. Whatever it is, you will tell me, and we will face it, and it will be better than carrying it alone, because it is killing you, lad, and I will not watch it." I have said I respected Ansel Thorne. I set it down here that I never respected any man more than in that moment, because he had every reason to believe the boy in front of him had betrayed him and ruined him, and he chose, before he knew, to offer him a hand instead of a rope. And the boy broke. He put his face in his clever hands and he wept, the ugly wrenching weeping of the young who have held a thing too long. And when he could speak, he told us, not the theft we expected, but something stranger and sadder, and once it was out, wholly convincing. He had done a wrong in that workshop, in those 20 minutes. But it was not the Heartstone. The lower band, he said when he could speak, not lifting his face. The small brilliant, the loose one that Master Vane came up to reset. He tightened the collet and he was called away. The Queen Consort steward came to the door and said Lord Cassius wished a word, and Vane went. He was only gone a few minutes, and the crown was on the bench, and I was alone with it, and his voice failed. Ansel Thorne waited. "There was a stone loose in my own hand," Bram Halloran whispered. "Not from the crown. A small brilliant, a chip, from a brooch of my mother's that I had brought in to have Vane look at, to see if it could be sold, because we owe, because my father died owing money and my mother cannot." He stopped. He forced himself on. The chip in my hand and the crown on the bench, and one of the collets on the lower band was empty. Vane had the loose stone out to reset it, and it was lying on the bench cloth. And I thought, God forgive me, I thought. If I put my mother's chip in the empty collet and took the crown's brilliant, no one would ever know. They are the same size, the same water, one small stone among 100, and the crown would be whole and my mother would have a real diamond to sell instead of a chip, and it would save her. And who would ever count the small stones on the lower band of the State Crown? He looked up at last, and his face was a ruin. "I did not do it," he said. "I swear before God I did not do it. I held the chip over the empty collet and I could not. I saw my hand doing it and I stopped and I put Vane's stone back and I put my mother's chip in my pocket and I have carried it 11 days like a coal in my chest, because I meant to, Master Thorne. I stood alone with the Crown of Eldermoor and I meant to rob it, and only my own coward's hand stopped me, and I have not been able to look at you since because you would see it in my face. That is what is wrong with me. That is my crime. I thought about it. That is all. I thought about it, and it has been eating me alive." The room was very quiet. I stood at the door and I understood, with the particular sick lurch of a man who has built a fine tall tower on a false floor, that I had read the book exactly wrong. Bram Halloran had been alone with the Crown for 20 minutes, and in those 20 minutes he had committed a whole theft in his heart and drawn back from it at the last inch. And the guilt on him was real and the shame was real, and none of it, not one grain of it, was the Heartstone. He had never touched the great stone. His temptation was a chip the size of a lentil for a dying widow's debts. He had told us the truth, the whole squalid, pitiful truth, at the cost of everything he had, and it cleared him of the only crime we cared about. "The Heartstone, Bram," said Ansel Thorne gently. "In those 20 minutes, did you touch the Heartstone? Did you see anyone touch it? Think, lad. Everything turns on it." The boy blinked at him, honestly bewildered, and I knew from the bewilderment alone that he was innocent, because a guilty man braces for the question he fears, and Bram Halloran had plainly never once thought about the great stone at the Crown's heart. "The Heartstone? No, no, sir. The Heartstone was never touched. The work was all on the lower band. It never— Why do you ask about the Heartstone?" And Ansel Thorne, who had decided somewhere in the last 5 minutes that this broken boy was to be trusted after all, told him. I watched the news land on Bram Halloran, and it was the final proof if I had needed one. The color went out of his face and then came back in a rush. He half rose, his clever hands came up. "Gone. The Heartstone is a counterfeit in the Crown right now, but that, sir, that is not possible. I was in and out of that workshop all afternoon. If the Heartstone had been swapped I would have—" And there he stopped, and his eyes went wide and distant, and I saw him doing the very thing we had been doing for 3 days, running back over the afternoon in his memory, minute by minute, looking for the hole. "I would have seen," he said slowly. "Wouldn't I? I was there. I was there almost the whole time." "Almost?" said Ansel Thorne. "You went out at 3:10, the book says, and came back at 4:20, half an hour. Where were you, Bram?" "Fetching Master Vane's second glass from the strong room," the boy said at once. "He'd left it below, he sent me for it. I was gone the better part of half an hour because I couldn't find it. It had rolled behind the—" He stopped again. His face changed. "He sent me for it," he repeated, very quietly, and now there was something new in his voice, something that made the hair stand up on my arms. "Master Vane sent me down to the strong room to look for a glass that he told me later he found in his own pocket the whole time. He sent me out of the room, and when I came back, the Crown was on the bench, and Vane was at the window with his back to me, and he said the work was near done. He sent me out of the room, Master Thorne. He sent me out." Ansel Thorne and I looked at each other over the boy's dark head, and neither of us said anything for a moment, because a thing had just turned over in the room, and we both felt it turn. "Bram," said the keeper very carefully, "when Master Vane went out earlier, when the consort steward called him to speak with Lord Cassius, how long was he gone?" "A few minutes, 5, not long." "And when he came back, did he seem as before? Or was there anything changed in him?" The boy frowned, dredging it up. "He was quicker than before, brisk. He said we'd been slow and must get on, and he sent me down for the glass almost as soon as he was back at the bench." He looked up and the last of the child went out of his face, and something older came into it. "He got Lord Cassius to call him out, and then he got me out. He made himself alone with the Crown twice in one afternoon, and each time he made sure the man who could have watched him was somewhere else. And I never saw it, because I was busy being a thief in my own small, stupid heart, and I thought the whole world was watching me." Ansel Thorne sat back slowly. The lamp hissed, and I understood, standing at the door with the cold current running clean and hard through me at last, that I had had it wrong from the first hour, and the book had been right the whole time. The book had said Orland Vane, the household jeweler, was in that room with the Crown from 2:15 until 10 minutes to 4, and had never left it, and I had crossed him off my list for exactly that reason, because the man who never leaves the room cannot be the man who slips out with the stone. But the theft was never going to be a man slipping out with a stone. The theft was a man staying in the room. The one man in all of Eldermoor with the skill to open the Heartstone's ancient claws, lift out the true diamond, and set a matched counterfeit in its place, cleanly, in minutes, with the tools of his own trade laid ready at his own hand. That man had no need to smuggle anything anywhere. He needed only to be alone with the crown for a little while, twice, with the two men who might have watched him sent conveniently out of the room, and he had arranged both absences himself. The jeweler. It had always been the jeweler. He had hidden in the plainest sight there is, behind the very fact of doing his job. "Master Orland Vane," said Ansel Thorne, and his old voice had gone hard as the strong-room door, "who has certified more of these stones than I have, who I would have trusted with any jewel in the collection." He looked up at me. "We have him, Sergeant, do we not? We have him." "We have why he did it and how," I said. "We have 3 days of a boy's shame and a book of times. We do not yet have the Heartstone. And a counterfeit in a crown is not a hanging matter until you can show the court where the true stone went." I was thinking hard now, the way my uncle taught me to think over a doubtful stone, slowly, from every side. "If Vane took the true Heartstone 11 days ago, sir, then one of two things is true. Either the stone is still somewhere within these walls, because he has not yet found a way to get so famous a diamond out of the palace and out of the kingdom, or it is already gone, sold or promised or carried abroad, and we are 11 days too late. Everything turns on which." "Then we must learn which," said Ansel Thorne, "before Orland Vane learns that we are asking." He rose and steadied himself on the desk, an old man who had aged a decade in 3 days and was not done yet. "And we must do it, Sergeant, without a jeweler who has just robbed the crown of its heart, catching the smallest scent that a guardsman with a bench-trained eye has been standing below his handiwork, seeing what no one was ever meant to see." We swore Bram Halloran to silence, and it was the easiest oath ever taken, because the boy would sooner have cut off his clever hand than say a word now. The shame that had been eating him had, in the space of half an hour, turned into something with a spine in it. Ansel Thorne told him that his own near crime would never leave that room, that a man who confesses a theft he did not commit has purged it, and that from this hour Bram Halloran was not a suspect but the third man of our hunt. I have seen soldiers given back their honor on a parade ground, and it did not do to them what those words did to that boy. He would have walked into fire for the old keeper after that. As it happened, before the affair was over, he came very near to doing exactly that. But first we had to learn the fate of the true Heartstone, and to learn it we had to learn Orland Vane, and the deeper I went into the household jeweler, the less I liked what I found. Vane was a big soft-spoken man of about 50, with the huge gentle hands that fine setters so often have, and a manner of grave courtesy that had made him a favorite in the great houses for 30 years. He was, by every account, the most gifted craftsman the collection had employed in living memory. He was also, I discovered by the patient guardsman's method of asking small questions of many small people, the man who brought his coal, the boy who cleaned his workshop, the clerk who paid the household tradesmen, a man in a great deal of trouble. The trouble was money, and it was the oldest trouble there is. Master Orland Vane, who dressed plainly and lived quietly and had no vice anyone could name, was drowning. He had lent his name and his savings 2 years back to a venture got up by a smooth younger man of quality, a scheme for importing cut stones from abroad and selling them to the new rich of the city, a scheme that promised much and delivered ruin. The younger man had walked away untouched, as such men do. Vane had been left holding the debts because it was Vane's name and Vane's reputation the creditors could reach. He had mortgaged his little house. He had sold his own tools twice over and bought them back. And still the debt grew, the way debts do, faster than any honest hand could work it down, and the men who held it were not patient men. And the smooth younger man of quality who had got up the ruinous scheme walked away clean and left the jeweler to drown. I need hardly tell you his name, for you have already guessed it. It was Lord Cassius Harrow. "So there it is," I said to Ansel Thorne low, in the strong room where we now met each evening under the pretense of the keeper's inventory. "Cassius ruined the jeweler 2 years ago and holds his debt." Cassius comes to the workshop the very afternoon the crown is up. He stays half an hour in plain view, with the book being signed and a guard at the door, a beautiful alibi, a lord who can prove he never touched the crown because a soldier watched him the whole time while his creature, the man he has by the throat, does the actual work. Cassius never dirties his own hands. He gets other men to be his hands, and then he stands in the light and smiles. I heard my own voice go hard. That was the smile I saw over the crown. "It is a good shape," said Ansel Thorne slowly. "It fits everything we know, and I do not trust it, because it hands us the man we already dislike, tied up in ribbon, and asks us to be satisfied. Cassius Harrow is a gambler and a wastrel, but a gambler in debt is a loud man, a desperate man, a man who leaves marks. This theft was quiet. This theft was patient. Someone had made stone grown and cut to answer the Heartstone's exact water, months in the working. That is not a man scrambling to pay this month's creditors. That is a plan laid cold and long, and it smells of a colder patience than Cassius has ever shown for anything but a card table." He shook his head. "I do not say he is innocent. I say do not let the man you dislike blind you to the man you have not yet thought of. Find the stone, Sergeant. A stolen thing always runs, in the end, toward the hand it was stolen for." It was the second time the old man had checked my certainty, and the second time he had been right too, and I took the lesson. I set aside the satisfying shape of Cassius as mastermind and went looking instead for the stone. And here the affair, which had been a matter of quiet corridors and whispered evenings, turned suddenly sharp and dangerous, because the moment I began to move toward the Heartstone itself, something moved to stop me. It began small. The workshop watchbook, the one that had shown us everything, vanished from the guardroom press. I went to consult it again to check a time, and it was simply gone, and old Pike swore he had not moved it, and the sergeant of the guardroom knew nothing, and there was no earthly reason for a routine watchbook 11 days old to walk out of a locked press on its own. But I had read it, and Ansel Thorne had read it, and Bram Halloran could swear to his own entries, so the loss, though it chilled me, did not blind us. It told us something worse than it took from us. It told us that someone now knew we were looking. Somewhere a still face had cracked, some careless word had carried, and the thief, or the thief's master, had reached into the guardroom itself and pulled the one piece of paper that pointed at the workshop. "They cannot have the boy's confession," Thorne said grimly when I brought him word. "That lives only in our 3 heads, but they have the book, which means, Sergeant, that from this hour we are hunted as we hunt. Take care. A man who has stolen the heart of the crown and matched a counterfeit to cover it will not stop at a book if he thinks a guardsman stands between him and the border." He was right to warn me. 2 nights later, walking the long lower gallery to my quarters after the last watch, in the dark stretch between 2 lamps where the portraits of dead kings hang, I heard a footstep behind me that was trying not to be a footstep, and I turned in time to take on my raised forearm a blow that had been meant for the back of my skull. I will not make a tale of it. The niche of my trade is stillness, not brawling, and I take no pride in the few seconds that followed. There was a man in dark clothes with a length of lead pipe, and there was the cold gallery, and there was the training that 11 years of standing still had laid down under everything else. For a guardsman is not a statue, whatever the tourists think, but a soldier who has chosen stillness, and a soldier's hands remember. I turned the second blow and closed, and used the man's own rush to put him hard against the base of a marble plinth, and it was over. He was not a soldier. He was a hired arm, a bruiser from the city with no more idea of why he had been sent than the pipe in his hand. And when I had knelt on him in the dark and put my forearm across his throat and asked him, quietly, who had paid him, he told me the one thing he knew, which was a street and a tavern and a middleman's name, and nothing higher, because men like him are never told anything higher. That is the whole point of them. But he told me one thing more, without meaning to, and it was worth more than the name. As I hauled him up to march him to the guardroom, he spat at my feet and said, in the ugly bravado of a beaten man, that I'd be sorry, that I was a dead man walking, that her ladyship's people did not forget. Her ladyship's people. I gave him to the watch, said nothing of what he had let slip, and walked the rest of the way to my quarters with the cold current running so hard I could hear it. Because there was only one her ladyship in the House of Harrowgate whose people a city bruiser would name in that lowered, half-frightened voice, not the young Princess Alara, nor the king's good sister Princess Adela. When a hard man said her ladyship's people and looked over his shoulder, he meant one woman, and I have already told you that we did not speak her name inside the walls. Ansel Thorne heard me out the next morning in the strong room, and when I had finished, he was silent for a long time. So the cold patience has a face after all, he said at last, not the son spending loud on cards, the mother, who has waited in this palace for years, watching a king who never quite loved her sit above a treasury that was never quite hers, gathering her people and her debts and her grievances the way a cold cellar gathers damp. A stone grown and cut in secret over long months. A ruined jeweler she could reach through her own son's hold on his debt. A theft laid patient and quiet and deniable, with the son's loud alibi in the front and the mother's cold hand in the dark, and a hired arm ready in the city for any guardsman who came too close. He looked very old and very tired. It is a better shape than mine, Sergeant. God help us both, I think it is the true shape. But, and here the old discipline came back into him, the 30 years of not being fooled. I have been fooled once this week by the shape that fit too well, and I will not be fooled twice by fitting it better. We still do not have the stone. And now we are 2 men and a frightened boy, hunted inside our own walls by the Queen Consort's people, with our one piece of paper stolen and a bruiser in the guardroom who will be silenced or freed by morning. We cannot go on alone, Sergeant. We have gone as far as 3 quiet men can go. It is time to carry this to a hand that can close on it, and there is only one such hand in Eldermoor, and it is a hard climb to reach it. The king, I said. The king, said Ansel Thorne. But you do not walk up to the king of Eldermoor, Sergeant Dunmore, and tell him his wife has stolen the heart of his crown, not on a stolen book and a bruiser's word and a guardsman's eye. He will not, he cannot hear it, not from us, not like this. We need the thing itself. We need the true Heartstone in our 2 hands, and the counterfeit beside it, and the whole chain from Vane's bench to her ladyship's people laid out so plain that no love and no fear, and no 40 years of a hard marriage can make it not so. Find the stone, Sergeant. Everything, the boy, the crown, our own necks, everything now hangs on finding the true Heartstone before they carry it out of the kingdom. And after 2 nights of a pipe in the dark, I think we must both allow that they mean to carry it out very soon. That very soon proved truer than either of us knew, for the next day the Jubilee proper began, and with it came the crowds and the confusion and the open gates that a patient thief needs to move a small heavy thing across a border. I want to tell you how we found the Heartstone, because it was not cleverness in the end, or not cleverness alone. It was the boy. Bram Halloran had spent 3 days as the 3rd man of our hunt, and he had spent them the way a young man spends a debt of honor he can never fully repay, recklessly, gladly, with no thought for himself. Where a guardsman in a bearskin cannot go a step unremarked, a slight, quick assistant keeper with an errand boy's face can go anywhere in the working parts of a palace, and Bram went everywhere. He haunted the workshop. He befriended all over again Vane's own shop boy, a lad he had known for years. And on the 2nd morning of the Jubilee, he came to me white-faced in a servant's passage and told me what the shop boy had told him, not knowing it meant anything at all, that Master Vane was leaving. That the great jeweler, who had kept his workshop in the palace for 30 years, had paid the boy his wages and given him a fine reference, and told him his services would not be wanted past the Jubilee, because Master Vane was retiring abroad to the warm south for his health, and taking ship in 3 days. 3 days. He is running, I said. The stone goes with him. Of course it does. Who would look twice at the household jeweler's own baggage, at a jeweler carrying stones? He has been the perfect mule from the first, because a jeweler may carry a fortune in cut diamonds through any custom house in the world and no man blinks. The Heartstone will go out of Eldermoor in Orland Vane's own bag, cut down or recut or simply lost among 100 honest stones, and we will never see it again. I gripped the boy's shoulder. Where does he keep his own things? Not the workshop, his private rooms, his own strongbox, wherever a careful man keeps the thing his whole future hangs upon. But here the trail ran cold, and here came the false dawn that very nearly finished us, and I must set it down honestly, because we searched. Ansel Thorne, as keeper, had the authority to inspect the workshop and did so, on a pretext, top to bottom with me at his side, and there was nothing. No Heartstone, no counterfeit's twin, no leavings of a grown stone, no letter, no ledger, nothing but the honest clutter of a master's trade. We had Bram coaxed the shop boy into describing Vane's private rooms, and I found a way in the small hours to look. And there was nothing there either but a plain man's plain life, a mortgaged house's worth of shabby furniture and a locked iron strongbox that, when Bram's clever fingers had done with it, held only debt papers and a dead wife's ring and 11 pounds in coin. No diamond. Nowhere. And that night, sitting empty-handed in the strong room with the false Heartstone throwing its dead gray glitter under the dome 3 feet away, I came as near to despair as I have come in all my service. We had the how and the who. We had a jeweler who would be on a ship in 2 days. We had a queen consort's shadow, and a bruiser's whispered her ladyship's people. And we could not lay our 2 hands upon the one thing that would turn all of it from a guardsman's suspicion into a truth the king must hear. The stone was not in the workshop, not in Vane's rooms, not in his box. It was already somewhere we could not reach, or it had already gone. Perhaps, said Ansel Thorne heavily, it is already out, past weeks ago, the moment it was cut free. Perhaps Vane's ship carries only Vane, and the Heartstone has sat in a vault across the sea since the day the crown came down. Perhaps we are chasing a stone that is already lost, Sergeant, and there is nothing to find because there is nothing here to find. It was the reasonable thing to think, the middle path, the sensible surrender. Except that the stone was gone, carry what little we had to the king, and let him do what a king does with suspicion and no proof, which is nothing. And I very nearly took it because I was tired, and beaten men were coming for me in dark galleries, and the thing had grown too big for 3 quiet people to hold. What stopped me was my uncle's voice and the bench, and a thing he used to say over a doubtful stone when a customer swore it was somewhere it was not. Look for it, boy, he would say, where a clever man would put a thing he could not afford to have found. Not in the safe is the first place any fool looks. In the plain place. In the dull place. In the place so ordinary that looking there feels like a waste of a clever man's time. Sir, I said slowly, and the cold current stirred in me one last time. We have searched everywhere a valuable thing would be kept, the workshop, his rooms, his strongbox, everywhere a man hides his treasure and found nothing. What if that is the answer? What if he has not hidden it as a treasure at all? I stood. A jeweler does not need to lock a diamond in a safe, sir. A jeweler can hide a diamond in plain sight, in the one place in all the world where a great cut diamond raises no question whatever. Among the jewels. He can set the Heartstone of Eldermoor into an ordinary piece, a brooch, a ring, a lapel pin, a thing of paste and glass and cheap silver, a gaud so plainly worthless that no custom house on earth would give it a second glance, and carry the true heart of the crown out of the kingdom pinned to his own coat like a trinket from a fair. Hide the truth inside a lie. It is exactly what he did to the crown, sir. He put a lie where the truth was. What if he has done it again, only backward, put the truth inside a lie to carry it out? Ansel Thorne was on his feet. The reference, he said, The shop boy's reference. Bram, when Vane paid the boy off, did he give him anything else? A gift. Tradesmen give a leaving gift. We had the answer within the hour, and it broke the whole affair open, because the truth, when it is finally cornered, has a way of being both simpler and more shameless than any of the shapes you built to trap it. Vane had given his shop boy a leaving gift, a cheap tin snuff box and a lapel pin, a nothing pin, a bit of bright paste in a silver-washed setting, the sort of gaud a master gives a boy he is fond of. The boy had it in his pocket that very moment. Bram, God bless his clever hands and his quicker tongue, had the pin off him inside 10 minutes, traded it for a handsomer one from a Jubilee stall and a warm story about wanting a keepsake of their years together, and brought it to me in the strong room, and I put my uncle's loop to it under the hard electric lamp, and the whole world went very still. The setting was rubbish. The silver was a wash over base metal. 4 of the small stones around the rim were honest paste, dead gray glitter, the same tired shine as the thing in the crown. But the 5th stone, the center stone, the one the cheap setting was built to draw the eye away from by ringing it round with obvious trash. The center stone took the hard white lamplight and broke it open and gave it back to me in fire. Red fire, blue fire, a spark of pure green, the whole rainbow hoarded up and paid back with interest. The living, burning, unmistakable truth of a great diamond, the fire that cannot be faked, sitting in a bit of tin a jeweler had meant to leave on a shop boy's coat and reclaim, no doubt at the ship, with some warm word about wanting his little pin back for a keepsake. The Heartstone of Eldermoor, hidden inside a lie, exactly as he had hidden the lie inside the crown. I looked up at Ansel Thorne, and the old man looked at the pin in my white glove, at the fire coming up out of the trash, and he sat down slowly in his chair as though his legs had gone from under him, and he put his ink-stained hand over his eyes, and I saw a single tear go down the side of the old keeper's nose, and he did not wipe it away. 200 years, he said very quietly, 200 years it has burned in that crown, and he pinned it to a boy's coat like a fairground trinket. He took his hand away. His eyes were wet and hard and bright at once. We have it, Sergeant. We have the Heartstone. Now, by God, we have everything we need. Not everything, I said, because the guardsman in me does not stop counting until the count is done. We have the true stone and the false stone, the how and the man. We do not yet have the hand it was stolen for. We have Vane, who was ruined and squeezed and made a mule. We have a bruiser who says her ladyship's people. We have a shadow. But a shadow will not stand up before the king on a stolen book and a beaten man's boast, and Vane on his own is a drowning man who stole to save himself, not a conspiracy against the crown. If we take him tonight, he confesses to his own theft, he swings or he is transported, and the cold patient hand that had the stone grown and the jeweler ruined and the guardsman clubbed in the dark, that hand pins the whole thing on a dead broke craftsman, washes itself clean, and waits and gathers and does it again. You said it yourself, sir. Find the stone, and the stone will tell us who it was stolen for. Well, we have the stone, now let us make it speak. The plan we laid that night was Ansel Thorne's, and it was the plan of a man who had kept the honor of a treasury for 30 years and understood, better than any soldier, that the object of the whole affair was not to catch a jeweler, but to lay a truth so plain before the king that even a king who did not wish to see it could not look away. We would not seize Vane. We would let him keep his counterfeit in the crown, keep his pin on the shop boy's coat, no, keep the boy's happiness whole, for Bram slipped the true pin back into the lad's pocket with the story that his fine trade had fallen through and the old one was best after all, so that Vane, coming to reclaim it at the ship, would find it exactly where he had left it and suspect nothing. We would let the whole machine run, and then we would put the king's own hand upon the lever. Reaching the king was the hardest climb of all, and it is here that Princess Adela enters this account, for without her we should have got no nearer to King Alaric than the outermost of his antechambers. The king's sister was a plain, upright, unfrightened woman who had loved the late Queen Isolde as a sister in truth, and who had watched the coming of the consort and her train with a clear cold eye and no illusions. She was, in the divided household, the one great figure who stood unmistakably on the crown's side of the line and could not be reached by her ladyship's people, because she wanted nothing they had to give and feared nothing they could take. Ansel Thorne had served her mother. He went to her alone, and he carried the true Heartstone in his old hand, and he laid it before her with the counterfeit's grey twin beside it, and he told her the whole of it, the fire that was missing, the guardsman who had seen it, the book, the boy, the jeweler, the ship, the shadow. And Princess Adela, who did not weep and did not exclaim, looked a long time at the two stones side by side, the living one and the dead one, and then she said the thing that told us she was with us to the end. "Bring me the guardsman," she said. "I will hear it from the man who saw it first. And then, keeper, we will decide how a truth this heavy is carried to my brother, because it must give the consort's people no crack to slip through, no chance to cry that a jealous sister and a frightened old man have conspired against a wife the king is bound to defend. It must be carried so that the king himself, before his whole court, turns the crown in his own hands and sees the lie with his own eyes. I know my brother. He will forgive much in that woman, for the sake of not having been twice a fool in one marriage. He will not forgive a thing he has seen for himself in front of his own court. So that is how we will show him, in the open, at the Jubilee's closing before them all." And so it was done, and I will tell it as I stood in it, because I was there, at my post, in the great hall, on the last evening of the Jubilee, when the truth of the Heartstone was laid bare before the whole House of Harrowgate. The closing was the grandest gathering of the whole season. The hall blazed with light. The household stood in its ranks. The king sat above them all with the queen consort at his right hand, and Lord Cassius easy and smiling among her people, and Lady Verena, and the whole cold, patient train that had waited so long in the corners of the palace. The state crown sat on its cushion of honor at the king's side, under no dome tonight but under the open blaze of 1,000 candles and the new electric globes both, and the false Heartstone at its heart threw its grey dutiful glitter, and no one in all that shining company knew it for a corpse but 4 people. An old keeper, a young clerk, a king's sister, and a guardsman standing at the foot of the dais with his eyes forward and his face a wall. Princess Adela rose to give the closing address, as was her right, and she spoke gracefully of the 200 years of the crown, and of the Heartstone that had thrown its rain of colored fire across the cathedral at Queen Mother Rosalind's accession. And as she spoke of the fire I alone was placed to see it, Master Orland Vane, standing quiet and grave among the household craftsmen, go slowly white. And then Princess Adela said that on such a night the king ought to hold the great stone in his own hand, and let the whole court see it burn, as their fathers had. And she turned to King Alaric and asked him, before them all, would he not take up the crown and show his people the living heart of Eldermoor? The king, who knew nothing, who had been told nothing, who thought this a graceful whim of his sister's on a night of pageant, smiled and rose, and took up the state crown in his 2 hands and turned it to the light so that the whole hall might see the Heartstone burn. And it did not burn. I have stood through many silences in that hall. I have never stood through one like the silence that came then, as 1,000 people leaned to see the famous fire and saw instead a grey dead glitter, a wet pebble shine, a stone that gave back the blaze of 1,000 candles as flat and cold as a coin. The king turned the crown one way and another, and the Heartstone stayed grey, and I watched the puzzlement cross his face, and then something colder behind it, because a king who has worn that crown knows what the stone at its heart is supposed to do. And into that silence Princess Adela said, in a clear voice that carried to the farthest wall, "It does not burn, brother, because it is not the Heartstone. It is a counterfeit, a made stone, cut to answer the true one, set into your crown 11 days ago in place of the diamond your fathers wore. The true Heartstone of Eldermoor was stolen. And tonight before your court we can show you the thief, the hand behind the thief, and the true stone itself if you will hear it." I have wondered since what it costs a man to be shown before his whole court, that the heart of his crown has been cut out from under him and he never knew. Whatever it costs, King Alaric paid it standing, and I will honor him for that as long as I live. He did not rage and he did not stagger. He set the crown down very carefully on its cushion, and he looked at his sister, and he said in a voice like a closing door, "Show me." And so the truth was laid out in the open hall, link by link, exactly as Ansel Thorne had built it. The old keeper came forward and told of the fire that was missing, and how a man of his own guard, bench-trained and sharp-eyed, had seen from the floor of the hall what he himself with all his instruments had failed to see. He named me and bade me stand forward, and I stepped out of my stillness for the first time in 11 years of service into the center of that hall, and I told the king, plainly and without ornament, what I had seen, and how I had known it, the fire that a true stone throws and a false one cannot, the gray dead glitter of the thing in his crown. Then the workshop was told, the crown gone up to reset a loose brilliant, the jeweler twice made alone with it, the 20 minutes, the second glass that was never lost sent for only to empty the room. And here Bram Halloran came forward, white and steady, and confirmed with his own mouth that Master Vane had sent him from the room on a false errand, and had done it with his own back turned to the bench and the crown open before him. Every eye in the hall had by now found Orlin Vane, and the big soft-spoken man stood in the light of 1,000 candles with the sweat shining on his gentle face, and when the king's cold gaze at last came to rest on him, he broke not into denial, but into the truth, all of it, poured out like water from a cracked jar. Yes, he had taken the Heartstone. Yes, he had grown and cut the counterfeit these 6 months past. But he had not planned it, he had not wanted it. He had been made to ruin 2 years since by a scheme that was not his, drowning in a debt that was not his, held by the throat by the man who had ruined him, and then come to him with the whole plot laid out and the debt as the price of it, the stone, or your ruin and your widow's ruin after you. And the king said in that same closing door voice, "Who? Name the man who held your debt." And Orlin Vane lifted his hand and pointed it, shaking, straight at Lord Cassius Harrow. The hall moved like a field of wheat under a wind. Cassius came half up out of his seat, his easy smile gone to something ugly and cornered, and he began loudly, quickly, in the voice of a man who has always talked his way clear, to say that the jeweler was a proven thief and would say anything, that it was monstrous, that a lord of the house would not stoop, that where was the stone, where was one shred of proof beyond a caught thief's lie? And it was a good defense. It might even have held, for we had the how and the man and the mule, but Cassius had been careful. Cassius had signed the book and stood in the light and left the dirty hand to Vane, and against him alone we had only a ruined man's pointing finger. But we had the stone. And now Ansel Thorne played the last card, the one Princess Adela had told him to keep for exactly this moment. He said quietly into Cassius's noise, "The stone can be found tonight. It is in this palace still. My Lord Master Vane never carried it out. He meant to carry it out at his ship in 2 days' time, hidden in plain sight in a cheap pin he gave to his shop boy as a leaving gift. The boy is below stairs. The pin is on his coat. Send for him, sire, and let the whole court see the Heartstone of Eldermoor come up out of a bit of tin. And then let us ask my Lord Cassius how a made stone comes to be cut to match a diamond he swears he never touched, and who paid the goldsmith across the city who grew it, whose account the payments ran through, for those accounts have been found, sire, and they are not the jeweler's." That last was the blow that landed, for it was the one thing Cassius had not known we held. Ansel Thorne had learned in his 30 years that a stone must be grown and cut and paid for by someone, and that money leaves a wake. And in the 2 days of our false dawn despair, the old keeper had quietly set the king's own household treasurer, through Princess Adela, to walk backward along the trail of a large strange payment to a city goldsmith 6 months gone. The account those payments had run through did not belong to Orlin Vane, who had not 2 coins to rub together, nor to Lord Cassius, who was far too deep in his own debts to have funded anything. It belonged to a household account only one person in the palace could draw upon at will, an account kept in the consort's own establishment, signed clear as day, 6 months before the theft, when no one yet had any reason to be watching. Every eye in the hall, having gone from the crown to the guardsman to the jeweler to the lord, went now, at last, where the money led to the still, pale, upright figure at the king's right hand. Queen Consort Morwenna had not moved through any of it. She sat as I had learned to sit, giving nothing away, her face a wall as good as my own, and for one moment I almost admired the cold discipline of it. But the account was in her hand. The son had done the ruining and the squeezing, the jeweler the cutting, the bruiser the clubbing. But the cold, patient plan that set them all in motion, laid 6 months cold to draw the living heart out of a crown that had never quite been hers, and turn it into a fortune she could carry away against the day her hard marriage failed her. That plan had been hers, and now, before the whole House of Harrowgate, the money said so in her own steward's hand, and there was no smile and no shadow and no her ladyship's people that could unsay it. King Alaric looked at his wife for a long, long moment. I was near enough to see his face, and I will not set down here everything that was in it, because some things a man is owed in private even in his most public ruin, and the king's face in that moment was one of them. I will say only that whatever love or habit or weariness had held that hard marriage together for its years, I watched it go out of the king's eyes like a candle pinched between 2 fingers, and what was left when it had gone was not rage. It was judgment. He turned from her without a word, and he spoke to the hall, and his voice had stopped closing doors and become the flat level voice of a king, doing the last thing a king ever wishes to do. The rest was swift, as the end of a thing long in the working often is. The shop boy was sent for, bewildered and blinking, and the cheap pin was taken from his coat before the whole court, and the king's household jeweler, a younger man, hastily called, for the old one stood disgraced, put a loop to it and cried out and lifted it. And the Heartstone of Eldermoor came up out of that bit of tin into the blaze of 1,000 candles, and threw its rain of colored fire across the high hall exactly as it had thrown it at Queen Mother Rosalind's accession 200 years before, so that the household stood in a fall of little rainbows, and a sound went through the hall that was half gasp and half something older, the sound a people makes when a thing it loves is given back to it from the dead. I stood at my post in the wash of that colored light, and I confess to you that my wall of a face very nearly did not hold, for I had carried the gray lie behind it for 11 days, and to see the truth burn again was more than a man can watch unmoved. The king's justice, when it came, was measured and cold and did not spare his own house. Orlin Vane, who had stolen but been broken to it and told the whole truth in the end, was stripped of his place and his name in the trade. But the king, hearing how he had been squeezed, spared him the worst and let him go quietly into exile in the warm south he had lied about wanting, a beaten man, but a living one. And the widow's debt that had first bent him was bought up and cancelled by the crown, so no other man could ever use it as a rope again. Lord Cassius, who had ruined and squeezed and hired the arm in the dark, was stripped of his standing and his rooms and put out through the gates I had guarded for 11 years, to live on his creditor's mercy, which is the coldest mercy there is. And the Queen Consort Morwenna, whose cold, patient hand had drawn the whole plan and paid for it out of her own establishment, the king did not rage at, nor shame further than the open hall already had. He simply ended it. Her establishment was dissolved, her people scattered, her tie to the crown severed by his own order, and she was sent from the House of Harrowgate to a distant estate to live apart from the court that had watched her fall, for a woman who had waited so long and gathered so much, a harder sentence than any prison, and she took it with the same still face she had worn when the money named her. As for Bram Halloran, the king heard the whole of his part, how the boy had been tempted alone with the crown and had drawn back at the last inch, and had then given himself, body and honor, to the hunt that saved the Heartstone. And King Alaric, who understood better than most men that night what it costs to be tempted and to hold, did a thing I did not expect. He did not punish the near crime. He weighed it against the wholehearted service that followed and found the service the heavier. He made Bram Halloran assistant keeper in truth and in title, under old Ansel Thorne's hand for as long as the old man wished to keep his post, and named him the keeper's successor after. The boy's mother's debt, like the jeweler's, was quietly settled by the crown, so that the thing that had first bent him toward the crown could never bend him again. I have heard he keeps the collection now, an old man himself, and that there is no more careful or more honest keeper of the regalia in the history of the house. And I believe it, for I have never seen a man so cured of a temptation as that boy was cured, in 20 minutes alone with a crown, of ever again wanting a thing that was not his. And me, I went back to my post. That is the whole of it, and it is the part I am proudest of. The king offered me advancement, a captaincy, a place of honor near his person, and I thanked him and asked leave to decline, and asked instead only that I be allowed to keep standing my inner watch below the dais where I had first seen the fire go out of the world. He did not understand it, I think, and Princess Adela, who understood everything, only smiled. But the truth is a simple one, and I will end on it, because it is the whole heart of my trade. A guardsman is a man who is set to watch a thing, and to see. The world walks past him in the tens of thousands and thinks him furniture, and never once considers that the whole point of a man forbidden to move is that he has nothing to do all day but look, and that a kingdom, if it is wise, will always keep at least one such man standing quiet in the corner of its treasure, with a still face and a patient eye, on the chance that one bright morning the light will fall a certain way, and the fire will be gone from the heart of the crown. And only the man who was set to watch and did will see the lie for what it is. I saw it. That is all I ever wanted to be able to say. I stood my watch and I saw, and I did not look away. The Heartstone of Eldermoor burns in its crown to this day, and I stand below it still, and between the two of us there is an understanding that needs no words. It keeps faith with the light, and I keep faith with it, and neither of us has broken yet.